Hey everyone, welcome to our podcast. This is the David and Ken podcast, and we're here to present another episode to you.
Today we're going to be talking, we're going to be doing a little bit more introduction, but this time we're going to talk about Ken.
Awesome. I guess any questions?
Right, that'd be good to have some questions. So first of all, Ken, where are you from?
Yeah, I'm from Springfield, Kentucky. I grew up there for a number of, I think, 12 years. But I've lived all over the place. I was born in Provo, really, but I was only there for like a couple months or less than a year, and then moved immediately to Japan. And then from there, I moved over to, Ohio, and then to Kentucky, and then was there for 12 years, and then went on my 2 year mission trip to Japan again, and then came back to the States and lived in Provo, Utah to go to school for 5 to 6 years. So, in general, I call home Springfield, Kentucky, but most of the time people say, "Oh, you're from Utah as well," but I'm like, I didn't really grow up there, so yeah, I claim myself to be from Springfield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you said Japan.
hmm
Why Japan? Why did you guys move to Japan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as a baby, from my understanding, because this is everything coming from my parents, my father had just graduated in Japanese, but they had some school debts and stuff. So my mother was an actual registered nurse, but she's Japanese and she's licensed in Japan. So what she had to do was, what my family had to do was to go back to Japan so that they could pay off, some of the student loans and start a new life there. My dad had a couple of business ideas that he wanted to try, and specifically in Japan. And while my mom was, paying the bills and things as well, along with my father, making sure, he taught English and things as well. So just a young family starting out, and most economical sense was to move to Japan at the time so that they could get their debts and things paid off.
Oh, and how long were you in Japan for?
That's a great question. I was there from, I guess my understanding was I was there from like 1 to 5, and so I was there for about 5 years, 4 years. My first speaking language is Japanese, and it's really funny to think about it. But I had a hard time grasping languages because
Mm-hmm.
both of my parents would speak Japanese and English. And it's this is a little fun fact that most people don't know about me is that whenever I went to the doctors, I think it was in Japan or whenever I was in the States, I was a little bit slower in developing speech and understanding languages. And so they technically diagnosed me with a language learning disability.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is really funny now because I speak English and I speak Japanese and I speak
Mm-hmm.
them pretty fluently. And I feel like I understand the languages a little bit better feeling wise than understanding like every grammatical structural point.
Mm-hmm.
I see languages more as like a feeling of words, if that makes sense.
Right.
hmm
Well, that's very interesting. Uh, so how was it then coming back to the States after you lived in Japan for basically the first part of your growing up ages?
yeah, David, it's really interesting. Oh bless you.
Sorry.
So it's interesting, right? Because as a kid, I don't know if my brain wasn't fully developed or what it was, but I didn't understand that there's two different languages. To be honest with you, it probably took about fourth or fifth grade to finally nail down that there is an English and there's Japanese, and that most of the people who don't look Asian speak English, and the people who look Asian speak Japanese. Bless you, by the
Oh,
way. and and so it took a long time to understand what words worked and what words didn't. So, for instance, as a kid in Ohio specifically, I knew that the missionaries spoke Japanese. Whenever I was in Japan, right, they came over and spoke Japanese, but they were, uh, well, from all the memories I have, they were white missionaries from Utah, right? And so when I came to Ohio and nothing was working language wise because I was trying to speak Japanese to all these kids that came over to my house, um, I went over to the missionaries and spoke to them in Japanese. And to my disappointment, I found out that the missionaries also couldn't speak Japanese. And so it was quite a learning experience. Well, it was really interesting as a kid in Ohio, but we lived in like a place called Inglewood and near Dayton. So it was a kind of a okay apartment, but it got more and more sketchy as time went on. And we were only there for 2 years, which is crazy. So all these kids would come over, and I had all these Pokemon cards, right? So Pokemon had just become a thing in the
Hmm.
U.S. And what was insane about Pokemon was Japan was 1 year ahead. And so all these episodes that were coming in were all a year old to me.
Hmm.
And so I had all these Pokemon cards that were like future. Like none of these kids have seen Snorlax before, or or like Lapras, or all these other like cool Pokemon that kids were like freaking out over because I had all these cards
Hmm.
that I collected from the mall and stuff. And so I remember I think this was my like fourth day there in Ohio. All these neighborhood kids come over and they're trying to talk to me, and I'm showing them my cards, and they're like, "You want to make a trade?" And I didn't understand what they're saying, so I was like, "Oh," I thought they just said they wanted to see the card, so like they just took my card and tried to run off with it, right? And I was like, "No, no, no, that's my card! And like I want that card." And the kids are like, "Oh, okay, he just doesn't speak English," and so that was a funny thing that
Hmm.
happened. I think one of the most interesting things as a kid, not being able to speak a language, is you have to be very quiet but involved at the same time because you can tune yourself out, right? I'm
Hmm.
sure you've
Hmm.
had moments where you're just like, I don't understand what's going on, and you just kind of just tune everything out.
Hmm.
So as a kid, it's really hard not being able to speak the language and kind of understand what everyone's telling you, but you can't reciprocate the feelings back.
Hmm.
And so I remember, oh man, I remember just a lots of just miscommunication issues. Like one time in elementary school, this is first grade in Ohio as well. The night before, my sister had used the bathroom, and she used the toilet paper and used too much toilet paper and stuffed the toilet too full, and she flushed it and it overfilled
Hmm.
and it spewed all over the floor, right? Like just all this toilet
Hmm.
water. It was nasty. And so my mother got really mad that night. And so the very next day, I went to school and I had to take the number two, right? And so I went into the bathroom and I feel so bad for my first grade teacher, but she was, a nice, young, like 23, 24-year old teacher. And I went to the bathroom and I used it, right? And I just had to keep wiping because there was just a lot that just came out. And so I stuffed the toilet, and I was so afraid of flushing the toilet that I sat in the bathroom for more than an hour and a half to 2 hours. And the
Dang.
teacher was like calling my name, was like, "Hey, you okay?" But I couldn't respond back in English really
Hmm.
well. So I was like, "Okay," and just sat there and didn't move. Just kept locked, the bathroom. And so she ended up having to call the male principal, and he came over and then he opened the door and he's like, "You all right there?" And I'm like crying, basically sitting there. And and then he's like, "What's wrong?" He thought I was maybe like, I don't know, having the worst cramps or like worst constipation ever. But no, I was just afraid to flush the toilet, right? And so I couldn't tell him that. And he looks at my stuff in the toilet and he's just like, "Oh," and then he just clicks the flush button, and the toilets in schools are like a lot more powerful than like junky apartments.
Hmm.
So that thing went whoosh, and just took everything away. And a moment of relief. I was just like, "Oh, thank goodness!"
Oh, relief
Or
twice.
just yeah, relief twice, right? And I was just like so nervous that something bad was going to happen, but ended up being okay. And the principal, and after that, I just stopped crying. I was like, "Okay," and just walked right out of
Dang.
the bathroom like nothing happened. And later that day, my school teacher wrote a note to my parents and said, "Hey, like we had an incident with your son at school. We just want to make sure he's okay. His stomach is fine." And it's just I just couldn't communicate
Hmm.
and straight up couldn't tell the teacher I was just too afraid to flush the toilet.
Dang. No, that's interesting actually because when I came to the States too, like I could understand English, like I took English in Peru and stuff, but I remember this one time, I really needed to go to the bathroom too, and for the life of me, I could not remember how to say I need to go to the bathroom in English, and so I was in the middle of class, and the teacher was teaching and everything, and you were only allowed to leave if you asked and got the hall pass, or you can just walk out. So I'm like trying to remember, and as I'm trying to remember, I have to go more and more and more, and um,
Oh no.
it was just I was so embarrassed that I couldn't say it, or I couldn't remember how to say I need to go to the bathroom, that I ended up just peeing my pants in fifth grade,
Oh.
and then the teacher, I guess, felt bad for me, and called someone, and then I ended up going to the bathroom after that. But
A
yeah,
little late at that point, though,
right.
right?
Yeah. But it is hard when someone who doesn't really understand the language, and there's things that you need to say or do that you can't, right?
Right. And you're little too, so like you can try to play charades, but you don't have the mental strength or the capacity to really communicate other than verbal ways, right? As a little kid, and so yeah, I just remember that sticking out really bad. Just oh yeah, that one was really rough. And then there was a whole bunch of others where like I cried because I thought I was being punished for like not getting a cookie,
Hmm.
but it was just because we couldn't get extra cookies for other kids.
Hmm.
But actually, I think what happened was my cookie actually got eaten by another kid, and but on the note it says, "Hey, Ken was upset that he couldn't get another cookie," and I'm pretty sure what had happened was somebody ate my cookie, and I was like, "Where's my cookie?" And they're like, "Oh, yeah." And so I tried to ask the teacher if I could have another cookie, but I couldn't say it really well at the time,
Hmm.
and so it kind of came off as like you're just trying to get another cookie, and I was like, "No, I just had my cookie eaten or stolen basically at that time." But I remember another funny situation, not being able to communicate, but like with kids, because sometimes it's like, oh, were you just not able to communicate with adults? And it's like, no, it's the same with kids. Like, I don't even think my wife knows this, but my wife thinks that she's like the first like ever girlfriend that I've ever had. Technically, I've had a girlfriend before. I
Mm.
just didn't know it. So how it happened was there's this like little blonde little girl, right? And she came up to me and grabbed my hand and says, "You're going to be my boyfriend." And I was like, I heard friend, but I didn't understand what boyfriend was. And so I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to be your friend, right?" And she's like, "Good, you're going to be my boyfriend." I was like, "Okay," just kind of going along with it. Next thing you know, I am stuck in this tunnel thing, like the little playground tunnels.
Mhm.
Every recess, I'm stuck in the tunnel holding her hand for like 20 minutes straight. And she's like, "So what did you do today?" I couldn't communicate, right? So
Mhm.
I'm like I'm just sitting there like not being able to talk this entire time. And this girl's like, yada 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 yada. I couldn't understand a single thing she said until my friend's like, "Hey Ken, you want to come out and play?" I'm like, "Yeah." And then she's like, "No, you can't go out because you're my boyfriend." I'm like, "I am? I can't go out?" And she's like, "Yeah, you can't go out." Finally, I think the kids like came in with rocks and said that they were going to throw like, my friends came in and said they're going to throw rocks at her if they don't let me go. So they finally let me go, and I think we broke up like I guess the week after or whatever. But yeah, apparently I had a girlfriend boyfriend, and I asked my parents like, what does boyfriend mean? And my mom explained it to me. It's like that's a bad thing, so I didn't tell my parents that I had a girlfriend or a boyfriend, right? I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna ignore the fact that it happened, and we're just gonna ignore that it was there. So yeah, yeah, I had a not wanted girlfriend boyfriend when I was in elementary school as well.
Wow.
Crazy,
Heartbreaker.
heartbreaker.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah.
But it took about the fifth grade till I could actually get a grasp of the language.
Yeah.
Homework was really difficult. Stayed up till like midnight, midnight on a couple nights, just trying to get homework down. I just could not get it. Like I
Hmm.
could not understand, and it took forever. Yeah, I mean, I like my parents thought I just was not getting stuff, and at the first, at, now I think about it, I probably wasn't getting it. Like my brain was just not able to take in everything, but there's just so much.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's something I could understand. When I was learning English too. And this went on for years. When like math, like easy, right?
Uh-huh.
But whenever I had to write something in English or something, like uh, I couldn't in fifth grade, sixth grade, and then after sixth grade, I went to high school, and teachers in high school would see my writing, and they would be like, "This sucks," basically.
Yeah.
They'd always like shut me down to the point where I didn't want to write anymore.
Yes.
So it can have a big effect on someone when when you want to do something but you're not able to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you hit it, but real good point. It's similar, exactly, all the way through middle school. I was told I was a terrible writer, in which I was. I was awful at
Mm-hmm.
writing, but I didn't try to become better. I just accepted the fact that I was awful at it and I was never going to be good at it. And I had a good high school teacher. Her name was Miss Mattingly. Shout out to her. She's awesome. But she came up and it's like, "Hey, Ken, I've noticed that your like academics are like pretty good. Like you're just in the normal English class. You should have taken honors, right?" And I was like, "Miss Manley, you have no idea what the history of like my writing is." And she's like, "Let's write you an essay." And she wanted me to write in a competition about like something about bullying, if I remember right. And as a kid, I remember bullying. Like it's awful, right? Like I was in a Japanese school when I was a kid. They do it every Saturdays here in Kentucky. So they gather all the Japanese children and like on a Saturday morning, drive them in a bus, and they go to Dunbar. And when they go to Dunbar, they have just Japanese curriculum, history, all this, and they do it from like 8 in the morning to like 4 p.m. And then you get released, and then you go home. And so it's for all those Japanese kids that come over to Kentucky, right? But I was singled out as being the foreigner, right? And I always thought as myself more Japanese than anything because I speak Japanese more than English, right? And it was conflicting because I would get like bullied and like made fun of all the time to where I just shut down and I was not learning anything at that school. I was just too afraid to do anything. And I remember getting taken in the corner of the room and just getting punched in the stomach, right? And just like bullying was just bad, right? So I remember once I finally was stopped going to that school, my learning had increased significantly, but I focused more on English rather than Japanese. So we just kind of tossed Japanese to the side and then started focusing on English. But from that experience, I knew that I should never bully anybody, single people out like that, because it's a terrible feeling. And I understand like when people looking from the outside in when they're seeing someone getting bullied, right? Well, they don't recognize is it how mentally taxing and how shut down you are to where it's almost impossible for you to learn. So I understand when someone's like, "Oh, you're a nerd," and you're getting bullied, but they're not learning, but I'm pretty sure they're smart. They're just too afraid to learn
Mm-hmm.
or do stuff, and it's just their instinct is trying to survive, right? At that point, and so, but side point from that, understanding what bullying is like is awful, right? And so I was having to write an essay from this high school teacher of mine, and so I write this essay, and it was a time in middle school when we were playing basketball, and there's this kid who's super big, right? He's I was on the eighth grade team, he was on the sixth, and he was just trying to make tryouts. He was just trying to survive tryouts and make it on the team, right? And so this is my third year. I feel like a veteran. I sat on the bench all 3 years. I didn't actually play, but I knew how to join the team and practice, right? And so this big kid, I mean, clearly he has a disability mentally. I don't know exactly what his disability was, and physically he wasn't as mm, I guess agile with his motor skills. He was huge, and we had to do these things called suicides. And suicides, for those who don't know, is run from the full court. You have the baseline, free throw line, half court line, free throw line, and baseline. And how you run suicides are you start from the baseline, you run up to the free throw line, and then you run back, and then run from the baseline, run to the half court or half court line, run back. And then you do that to the other free throw line, run back. Then you run to the full baseline and run back, and then that's when you take your break, your like 10-second,
Mm-hmm.
15-second break. And so we had to run these suicides for conditioning, for tryouts, all right? And this kid just was having the hardest time trying to run these suicides. And when he was trying to do this, he was huffing and puffing, and he was saying he's going to quit. He was actually crying, like, but we don't like making kids cry, especially like someone who's a little bit mentally disabled, and
Hmm.
it kind of just leaves a sour taste in your mouth, right? And so our team captain actually like uh stopped, after he finished running his suicides, he went out and started running with them, and he was encouraging them along. Then our co-captain went up there and started encouraging him along. And these are eighth graders talking to a sixth grader, right? Like we didn't want to talk to them. They're the newbies, right? But we saw this, and our entire team actually started running his suicides with him, and we were cheering him on. We're like, "Come on, man, we got this. We can do it." And the coaches, like at first was like, "Hey, if you can't run this, you're not going to join the team, right?" And then after a while, he saw the entire team come together, and at the end of it, he was like, that is more impressive than making it on the team. But because of what I saw today in tryouts, basically everybody made it on the team. The kid made it on the team, and he ran suicides, with everyone's encouragement, and so I took that excerpt, that memory, and I wrote that story down. And I was like, hey, instead of bullying, you should encourage, uplift, and like burden the shoulder of like the suicide, even if you're not really lifting his running away, but encouraging him and taking every step with him, right? And so, I remember writing this essay, and the title was uh, "Don't Bully, Run Suicides."
Hmm.
And so I thought that would catch people's attention. And that essay I submitted, right, and I had a little bit of help with my dad helping me out with some of the grammar things because I still had some issues with grammar, but not as bad as I was in middle school. And that essay actually won the competition. And they put it on the newspaper, and they like
Uh,
read it, and it was really cool. And it was something that my teacher and at Miss Mattingly from English class had taught me to like be more confident in your writing skills. And so from that point on, I was a little bit more confident. I wrote more things, but at the same time, I wasn't still a great writer. So hence I went into engineering, right? So
can't write, go into engineering.
yeah,
No math.
you don't have to write as much. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
that's
why I
cool.
always thought that when you grow up, you don't have to write very much, but most of my job is writing.
It's really funny you say yeah because I have a co-op at where I work. I'm not gonna say where I work at, but I have a co-op, and he comes in and he's like, "Hey man, like your email, you have the wrong two in there." I'm like, "I have like TOO instead of TO." I was like, well, "Man, I can't remember what the difference is." And he's like, "Really?" I was like, "Yeah, I actually have like I struggle like understanding like which two to write." He's like, "Oh, well, let me explain it to you." And he explains it to me. It's like a young 19-year-old kid, right? I'm like 28 years old, like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
thank you. Writing this email down. But in general, not too many people judge on if you write the wrong two or on the right two, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So when do you move to Springfield then?
Yeah, I moved to Springfield probably, I was in second grade. Yeah, I was in the second grade. I had started to grasp English a little bit more, but I couldn't understand what was the difference between English and Japanese probably at that point still. So I was interchangeably using Japanese and English, and my friends learned Japanese because I used Japanese with them. And they just probably thought it was just something that I just said, and they just kind of went along with it. And so they didn't exactly help me learn English as much because they just started using Japanese phrases with
Mm-hmm.
me as a kid. So in second grade, I was there, and then I graduated high school from Springfield. And what's remarkable about the class that I grew up with is everyone's like super super nice. Everyone, it's a small community, about 100 people that I graduated with in high school. So the high school total itself was 500.
And that's time.
Yeah, yeah,
That's smaller than my graduating class.
yeah. Smaller than your graduating class is probably like 1,000 in Utah, right, or two
Well,
thousand.
500, I think, is the number of people that dropped out
Oh
from
wow.
my graduating class. Yeah.
Yeah, see, for my high school, my senior year, we were the class that didn't have a single dropout from all the way from elementary
Wow.
school to high
Pretty
school.
impressive, actually.
Yeah, no, we had a really good group of kids. I know some teachers might disagree, but my classes were pretty friendly. There were like a little teasing here or there, like little hazing, but like it builds character, right? But like in general, my class, we were all best friends, and so I mean, I come to class reunions and it's not awkward for me. They're all super friendly and they're like, "Hey man, how's it going?" I'm like, "Hey, I remember you. How's everything going?" And I see them successful and that they see me and they're cheering me on, and so we keep in touch over Facebook. We like each other's posts, and as of right now, knock on wood, no one has passed away in our graduating class. So like we've been together since like elementary school. Now we did have three separate middle schools that competed, but we all knew each other because we competed in sports against each other, and we grew up in a small community. So we did the same little league,
Mm.
same basketball, same football stuff. So we knew each other when we got into high school, and then everyone was pretty good. It is going to be hard for someone moving outside, moving in, but because I had done that early, they thought I had just grown up with them since kindergarten. So from second grade on forward, we all knew each other. We knew each other's siblings, grandparents, parents, and it's a really good community. So if you want ever to slow down and have a good relaxing small community vibe, Springfield's a pretty good place.
Yeah, sounds tiny.
It's what's unique. Most people find this unique outside of Kentucky. We have this thing called Tractor Day over at Springfield, Kentucky, and what's insane about Tractor Day is these high school kids just wake up and they bring their tractors on that day and they drive it all the way into school. So they wake up early, like early, early in the morning, like 4:35, just so they can drive the tractor to school. Would be there
Wow.
on time at 8 in the morning. And then they have like this little tractor like competition of who has the coolest tractor, who has the oldest tractor and
Pimp your
stuff.
tractor.
But yeah, what's insane about it is on that day you'll see it just all the way snake out. And I tell people in Utah this, and they're like, "No way!" And it's like, no, there's legit tractor day. Like,
Wow.
yeah, where people drive tractors. So, a good little place.
Yeah, those things are slow. I drove a tractor here yesterday. Speaking of tractors, they're pretty slow. Yeah,
Yeah, it'll take its time.
yeah, yeah. So, tell me about after high school then. What did you do?
Yeah, after high school, right? I it was during the time of the mission age change for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So, being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I wanted to go on a full-time mission. I knew I was always going to go on a full-time mission, so I had to actually prepare to save up money as a kid, right? And so, what's interesting about saving up money for a mission is that your entire money is going to go to that mission. It's going to be gone. Like that's why I saved it, right? So I worked at this place called Kroger, and right when the mission age change happened, I had braces on, so I couldn't actually just go, and I didn't actually have the money quite yet either. And so I worked at Kroger for a year and had fun experiences there and made a lot of good friends. And we'll talk more later on the podcast with like crazy work stories because I got some really interesting work stories over at Kroger. But yeah, I saved up money for a year and then went to Japan. I got called to Japan. And what's insane about going to Japan is my last area after like a year and a half of being in Japan, I went and served in the area that I had moved to when I was a kid
Oh
from
wow.
Provo to Japan. So it was nice to come back and visit some of the friends that my parents and I had and talk to them, and it's pretty crazy stuff. And a lot of my friends at that time, or a lot of people that I knew that were half Japanese, half white, were being called to Brazil to speak on a Japanese speaking mission in Brazil. But they would also have to learn Portuguese.
Hmm.
And I had already struggled enough to learn a language. I didn't want to learn another one, right?
Hmm.
And so I was praying, I was hoping that I would not get called to Brazil, but I got called to Japan. But it's funny how it works, how things work in mysterious ways. Is my favorite mission companion is Brazilian,
Hmm.
and he was awesome. And I learned a lot about the Brazil, and I spoke just simple phrases in Portuguese like obrigado or like things like that, or like uh, uh, e amo você, like those type of things. I've learned those like phrases in Portuguese, and yeah, no, I had a great time in Japan being with Brazilians. Like that's probably one of my favorite memories of being in Japan was actually hanging out with Brazilians. But of course, the Japanese people and being in Japan. Yeah.
Uh, that's that's really neat. Yeah. So you said that you're an engineer. What, why, why did
Why?
you want to be an engineer?
David, that's a good question. I knew engineers made a decent amount of money. And my father actually went into IT, but at that time he didn't actually like graduate from university with IT. So I saw how our family was, and now my dad makes a good amount of money now. But before, we struggled on a couple of things. Just making sure that we had stuff. And it wasn't like a terrible struggle. It was just like, oh, this time we're not going to be able to buy this, and it was a healthy economical status, I think. But in some cases, we did have to restrict our spending in certain areas here or there, especially during the recession, right? And so during the recession in '08 and '09, I remember going through this huge sticky pedal incident. Oh, well, I said where I worked at. Well, I have to cut that out. But basically, what had happened was this company had a sticky pedal incident where cars would just take off, and there was a death that was involved, right? And the recession had hit, and it was looking really bad for that company, that automotive company. But they didn't lay anybody off, and because they didn't lay anybody off, all these suppliers that worked for them weren't laying people off as well because they needed to still supply the parts to that specific company. And so, as a kid growing up in a small community that was heavily influenced by the automotive maker, and there's also these other automotive makers like Ford, GM, and in the state of Kentucky, mostly Ford, they had laid off some people that I knew specifically, and they didn't have a job and they're struggling, and then that snowballed into all this people like struggling for money, right? And because I saw this automotive company, I said, you know what, it'd be nice to work for them in the future. And so I taught English to the Japanese engineers at the suppliers, and they basically said, hey, like I think what would be good for you is you should go and join engineering. It wasn't because I like just liked it. It was because basically I was told that I'd be good at it probably.
Hmm.
And I did like classes like AutoCAD in high school that like let me design things, and then I was good at math. So there's no way I was going to touch history. I wasn't going to be a lawyer. I wasn't going to
Hmm.
be, those type of things. And so the way they said that I would have to make a decent living would be either engineering or IT. But my dad was doing IT, and I didn't really like the idea of what he was doing as much. And so I joined engineering, and I was like, oh, I might give coding a try, and coding was not my thing. So engineering was more my go to try to fulfill
Hmm.
it and try to wing it. My mother scared me out of the health industry because she has like a lot of horror stories of her being a nurse, and a lot of schooling to be a doctor. And there's just no way probably I'd pass. And of course, my grades weren't even good enough to be accepted into med school. So at the end of the day, I picked, I think, the right field, and I'm enjoying my job
Hmm.
now.
That's good. Well, just so you know, I know some people that BS their way to through med school or
Yeah.
into med school.
You see, I didn't want to be a bad doctor.
So,
Yeah, yeah, I didn't want to be a bad doctor. Bad doctors end up getting people killed. So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
There's a lot of bad doctors.
there are lots of them.
Hmm.
Yes, but there are some good ones. So we need you. We need you, good doctors. Please graduate and try to
Yeah.
be as good as you can.
Spend some time with your patients.
Yes, please spend time with your patients. Yes, yes. Well, I think we're getting time to it, aren't we? It's about 34 minutes
Hmm.
in. Any follow questions that we want to say?
I think we're good.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today at the David and Ken podcast. We hope that you enjoyed the podcast and continue following our series. Thank you so much.